Welcome back, listeners. We're about to take a deep dive into the world of education back in the 1970s.
Really fascinating era.
It is, and we're going to be exploring it all through the experiences of Jim.
Oh, yeah, I love Jim's story.
So Jim was an American teacher who decided to make the move up to Canada.
Big change.
Huge. Ended up teaching at a junior high on Vancouver Island. And he wrote this memoir about his time there.
I love memoirs.
They're so insightful, and this one's just full of these amazing stories.
And a really different perspective on teaching, especially for its time.
Exactly. Back then, they called them occupational courses.
Occupational, yeah.
And it's so interesting to see how they approached working with students who maybe weren't thriving in that kind of traditional academic setting,
Yeah, Jim's story gives us a real window into that period.
and how things were changing, like the whole idea of special needs was so different back then.
Right. Much less nuanced than how we understand it today.
So the memoir really helps us understand the attitudes and approaches of that time. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of his teaching, let's rewind a bit to Jim's move from California to Canada.
Right.
What was that culture shock like for him?
Well, he talks about some funny little things he noticed right away about those differences between Canadians and Americans.
Oh, I bet. Like what?
Well, he actually quotes this writer who said the best way to tell Canadians and Americans apart is to point it out to a Canadian.
Uh-huh. I could see that.
So there were definitely some adjustments,
Yeah, I bet.
especially those early days, when he was subbing.
Oh, the substitute teacher days.
Yeah, and his memoir is full of anecdotes from that time. I mean, hilarious and kind of awkward all at the same time.
Oh, I love a good teacher story. Spill the tea. What kind of situations did he find himself in?
Well, one time he tried to be the cool sub.
Oh, no.
Let the kids have candy while they work, thought it would be fun.
Oh, the sugar rush.
Total sugar frenzy. The kids nicknamed him Mr. Groovy.
Oh, no. Not Mr. Groovy.
And needless to say, that school didn't call him back.
That's like a classic rookie substitute teacher mistake,
Definitely learned a hard lesson about classroom management that day.
for sure. Sounds like these early experiences really made him rethink those traditional teaching methods.
They did, which is what leads us to his permanent position, in the occupational program.
Oh, yeah, at Colquitz Junior High.
That's the one.
So, for those of us who weren't around in the 70s, paint us a picture. What exactly was this occupational program all about?
Well, basically, it was like a vocational track aimed at prepping these students for specific jobs,
Okay.
very much rooted in those traditional gender roles of the time.
Oh, I can imagine.
Girls were often steered towards things like home economics,
Makes sense.
secretarial skills, and the boys, they'd get ready for more of the industrial stuff or those hands-on trades.
Oh, wow. Things have definitely changed since then, at least in terms of those gender divisions.
For sure, big time. And when Jim got there, inherited this classroom, it was like a reflection of the old school split.
Oh, interesting.
His room was decked out with workbenches, tools, while the girls' occupational classroom had, stoves, sewing machines, that sort of thing.
Wow, a real division.
But it sounds like Jim had a different vision for this whole program.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did. He kind of gradually shifted the focus away from those purely vocational skills.
Interesting.
Towards what?
He called it socialization.
Socialization. I'm intrigued. What did he even mean by that?
He really believed that students, especially those who weren't exactly, flourishing in a traditional academic environment,
Yeah.
they needed more than just that job training. He
Yeah.
wanted to create a space where they could develop their social skills,
Mm-hmm.
build confidence, and explore their interests in a more, less structured way.
I love that.
Yeah, it was less about prepping them for a particular job and more about fostering personal growth
Yeah.
and creating a real sense of community.
It's like a holistic approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this philosophy was like perfectly embodied in how he totally transformed room 116.
Okay, I'm ready. Tell me. Okay, are you ready for this? He got rid of all the desks.
Whoa. No desks. That's a bold move.
It was radical. He wanted to create this flexible and stimulating environment,
I could see that.
So he brought in salvage materials, built balconies, even hung a parachute from the ceiling.
Wait, a parachute? What? What was going on in
It
there?
was wild. And get this, he even managed to acquire a bathtub.
A bathtub in the classroom. How did that even happen?
He put an ad in the local paper, believe it or not.
No way.
Teacher seeks bathtub for classroom.
That's amazing.
And someone actually donated one.
I love it. What was the bathtub for?
He envisioned it as like a cozy reading nook, just adding to the whole unconventional vibe.
I can picture it. That's incredible.
It's more like an art studio or community center than a typical classroom.
Right.
Totally. And this whole out-of-the-box approach, it extended to his teaching methods too, especially in his Spanish
Oh,
classes.
Spanish. Okay, tell me more about that.
So he absolutely refused to use that standard textbook El Camino Real.
Il Camino Real. Yeah, I vaguely remember that one. Why was he so against it? What was the problem?
Well, he found that traditional grammar-heavy approach,
Yeah.
too dry, focused on rote memorization. He wanted his students to learn through storytelling,
Okay.
conversation, real immersion in the language.
That makes sense.
He even rejected the audiolingual method, which was big back then,
Yeah.
but it relied so heavily on those repetition drills.
Right.
So instead of just repeating verb conjugations,
Yeah.
his students were listening to stories, actually trying to communicate in Spanish.
Oh, wow. So he was way ahead of his time in a way.
He was recognizing the importance of authentic communication,
Right.
creating that engaging learning experience. It's really cool.
Yeah, very cool. But it sounds like his biggest challenges, at least at first, came from that work without pay part of the program.
Oh, yeah, that was a whole other thing.
Okay, work without pay for students. That sounds a little, I don't know.
A little controversial.
Yeah, a little controversial.
It was common back then. The idea was that students would get real-world experience by being placed in jobs around the community.
Yeah, I can see the benefits, but also the risks.
Totally. And there were definitely issues. Some students were taken advantage of, put in dangerous situations.
Oh, no.
Some had their bus fare stolen. Some faced discrimination. Even a heartbreaking story about a student who later died in a workplace accident.
Oh, my gosh, that's awful.
It really made Jim confront the ethics of the whole system,
Yeah.
It was tough, constantly battling to protect his students while also trying to give them meaningful opportunities.
That's a tough balance to strike, for sure.
It is, and all these challenges led him to really push for a change in the program,
Yes, sir.
moving away from those placements and more towards that socialization he was talking about.
Okay, so more that personal growth focus.
Exactly. And that opened up all sorts of possibilities.
I bet. Especially when it came to field trips.
Oh, the field trips. Now, those were legendary.
I can only imagine. Let's talk about those after a quick break.
Sounds good. We're talking piling into Jim's Jeep, heading out to explore salvage yards. Witness salmon runs visit lighthouses.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. Even took them swimming in their underwear.
No way.
Or gonk, as the Canadians call it.
Gonk, you gotta love it.
Yeah.
But there's this whole other element to Jim's teaching that we haven't even touched on yet.
Hey.
The classroom menagerie. He had all these animals in room 116.
Oh, yeah, the animals. What a crew.
What was the thinking behind that? Like, why bring all those creatures into the classroom?
He believed that animals could be therapeutic for the students,
Interesting.
especially those who struggled with social interaction or maybe emotional regulation.
Okay, I can see that.
He had hamsters, snakes, a canary named Peepsy, even a rat named Sam.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
It was, and I bet there was chaos, maybe a mishap or two along the way.
I can only imagine. Was there any, like, standout student-animal relationships that you remember from the book?
There's a really touching story about a student named Bradley.
Bradley, okay.
The school psychiatrist had labeled him a sociopath,
Oh, wow.
but he formed this really strong bond with Peepsy the canary
Ah,
and was devastated when the bird died. Seems like caring for this little creature really brought out a softer side in him.
it's like animals can help us connect on such a deep level,
They can. It's a good reminder that sometimes the best therapy comes with feathers and fur.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Though I'm guessing things didn't always go perfectly smoothly with all those animals in the classroom.
You're right, even with the best intentions.
Nature happens.
It does. Remember Sam the rat?
Oh, right. Sam, what happened there?
Well, let's just say Sam lived up to his species' reputation.
Uh-oh.
Ended up killing one of the classroom mice.
Oh, no.
Poor Jim and the students, they were horrified.
I bet.
Definitely a tough lesson for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. But it seems like those weren't the only dramatic events happening in room 116.
Oh no, not by a long shot. We can't talk about Jim's time at Colquitz without mentioning those legendary wrestling matches.
Oh, yes. The wrestling matches. They practically became school legend. How did those even get started?
Well, it all started with Bradley,
The same Bradley who was close with Peepsy.
the one and only. He loved wrestling, saw those wrestlers as role models,
Larger than life.
Exactly. And Jim, being Jim, always trying to connect with his students on their level,
Right.
saw it as a chance to build a rapport with Bradley.
Okay, so it started as a way to engage with him, Maybe even channel some of that energy he had.
Right, but then it escalated
Oh, no.
from these casual grappling sessions to full-blown classroom spectacles.
Oh, way.
Word got out, and soon kids from all over the school were piling into room 116.
To watch these teacher-student wrestling matches.
Oh, yeah, they became quite the event.
I can only imagine what that scene was like. Was there a particular match that really stood out in the memoir?
There's this one Friday afternoon,
Okay.
became legendary. Bradley challenged Jim to a real match,
A real match.
complete with hand-drawn posters, war paint, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, he was serious.
Dead serious. Even had someone filming it all with that classroom video camera.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So what happened? Give us the play-by-play.
It was pure pandemonium.
I bet.
Picture it. The classroom transformed into this makeshift wrestling ring.
I can see it.
Kids crammed in everywhere, the air thick with excitement.
And Jim's in there, ready to rumble.
He tried to keep up with Bradley, flipping, flopping, somersaulting, but Bradley was relentless.
Fueled by the roar of the crowd.
And his own drive to win. But in the middle of all that noise, Jim started to sense that something wasn't right with Bradley.
Oh, what do you mean?
He had this intensity, like he'd snapped. At one point, Bradley had Jim in a headlock, squeezing so tight that Jim could hear his own skull cracking.
Oh my gosh, that's scary.
Even whispered, "Are you okay?" But Bradley just growled and squeezed tighter.
Yikes. So what did Jim do?
He knew he had to de-escalate the situation,
Right.
but he didn't want to humiliate Bradley by just giving up.
I can see that.
So he decided to stage this dramatic defeat.
Okay, how did he pull that off?
He started thrashing around wildly, making a big show of being overpowered.
Oh, clever.
Banging his fists on the mat, pretending to give up. And Bradley, caught up in the moment,
Yeah.
finally released his hold, declared victory.
Wow, so Jim managed to handle a potentially dangerous situation with incredible sensitivity.
He did. The crowd went silent, that intensity vanished, and everyone, including Bradley, seemed to come back down to earth.
What a story. I can't believe he went straight from a classroom wrestling match to his dentist appointment.
That's Jim for you.
Always on the go. But the story doesn't end there, right?
It doesn't. That Sunday, Bradley called him.
Oh. What was that about?
He needed reassurance that his win was real, even if Jim had kind of let him win.
That's both heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time.
It is, but Jim, being Jim, reassured him.
I bet.
Told him he had all the right moves, just lacked the size, a little white lie, but probably meant the world to Bradley in that moment.
Jim.
Yeah, he really knew how to connect with these kids. But speaking of Jim's students, the memoir shifts focus to another one of those important relationships, his bond with Brenda.
Go.
Brenda's story is really poignant.
In what way?
It highlights those challenges faced by so many First Nations children back then,
Yeah.
She was a foster child, separated from her family, carrying so much unspoken pain.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is. But Jim's classroom, with that welcoming atmosphere, the unconventional setup,
Right.
it seems to have provided her with a sense of solace.
I can see that.
She'd often hang out there, even after school.
It sounds like a safe space for her.
It was. Especially compared to her foster home, a place where she felt unseen, unappreciated.
Right.
And Jim, with his incredible intuition.
Always tuned in to his students.
Always. He picked up on those struggles, didn't pry, but offered her support, encouragement.
That's so important.
It is. Even let her personalize her space in the classroom,
Okay.
Yeah, she brought in her own furniture, painted one of the windows.
That's beautiful. It's like she was making her mark.
Exactly. And that painted window, it becomes a powerful symbol in the book.
How so?
Represents her longing for beauty, stability in her life, a small act of self-expression in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable for her.
That's so powerful.
It's a reminder that the most meaningful learning can happen outside those textbooks, those lesson plans.
It's about creating a space where students feel seen, heard, valued.
Exactly. But then there's that awkward encounter with Brenda's foster mom during a home visit.
Oh, yeah. That didn't go so well, did it?
Not really. Jim went with the best intentions, hoping to build a bridge,
Right. Understand Brenda's home life a bit better.
Right. But the visit, it just went south.
Oh, no. What happened?
Brenda's foster mom was cold, critical, dismissive.
Oh, no.
Even pointed out the holes in Brenda's socks as proof that she was irresponsible.
Oh, that's awful.
It's rough.
Oh.
And then Jim looks down at his own feet and realizes he has a hole in his sock, too.
Oh, wow. That's ironic.
It is. It's a small detail in the book, but speaks volumes about the assumptions we make about others.
Especially those from different backgrounds, right?
Exactly. It must have been really disheartening for Jim, realizing the limits of his role.
Yeah, he couldn't shield Brenda from everything.
He couldn't. But what he could do, and what he did brilliantly,
Yeah.
was create a counter-narrative within the classroom.
I like that.
He reinforced Brenda's worth, her value, challenged those negative messages she was getting elsewhere.
In a safe and supportive environment.
Absolutely. And you see this so beautifully in that scene where Jim's darning his own socks and Brenda offers to help.
Oh, I remember that scene.
It's like she's saying, I see you, I care, I want to help.
Right.
And Jim, he recognizes that shared vulnerability. It's not just him teaching Brenda, he's learning from her too.
Beautiful. A reminder that teaching and learning, it's a two-way street.
It is. But the memoir, it doesn't end on a purely happy note.
Oh.
Life outside the classroom, it can be unpredictable, even tragic sometimes. Years later, long after Jim's moved back to the States,
Okay.
he gets this collect call from Bradley.
Oh, I don't like where this is going.
It's from prison. Bradley had gotten into trouble with drugs, ended up incarcerated.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is. It's a harsh reminder that even the most dedicated teachers can't always prevent their students from making bad choices or from those tough circumstances, you know?
I know. It's tough.
But there's a glimmer of hope in that call.
How so?
Bradley reached out to Jim, the one adult he felt a real connection with.
Right.
Maybe seeking guidance, maybe even forgiveness.
It really shows the lasting impact a caring teacher can have.
It does, even years down the line. It's a testament to human connection.
And to that belief that even in dark times, there's always that potential for redemption.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really makes you think, that ripple effect teachers have.
It does.
Even when things don't turn out how we hoped, that connection can still mean so much.
Absolutely. And Jim's story, it doesn't end with that phone call.
It doesn't.
No, he goes on to reflect on how much the education system has changed since his time at Colquitz.
Oh, interesting. Both in Canada and the U.S., I imagine.
Both, yeah. And I'm curious what he thought about those changes.
Me too. Did he see them as good, bad, or a little bit of both?
He definitely acknowledges the progress that's been made.
Like what specifically?
Well, in terms of inclusion and mainstreaming students who might have been segregated before.
Right, back when they were labeled special needs.
Exactly. So that's a huge positive.
Definitely. But it sounds like there might be another side to this.
There is. He expresses some concern that in this push for standardization and academic achievement,
Yeah.
we might be losing sight of hands-on learning and those socialization experiences that he was so passionate about.
So it's like a trade-off almost.
Kind of, yeah. Between inclusivity and those less structured, more experiential ways of learning.
That's a tough balance to find.
It is, and it raises a big question.
Which is?
How do we create systems that meet everyone's needs?
Right, because everyone learns differently.
Exactly, but also how do we keep that focus on creativity, social connection, that sense of wonder, you know?
It's such a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is.
But Jim's story, it reminds us that sometimes the best approaches are the ones that challenge how we think about things and put the needs of each student first.
Absolutely. Jim, he wasn't afraid to break the mold, create an environment that was as unique as the students he was teaching.
And in doing so, he really touched their lives.
He did. It's powerful, how transformative education can be.
When it's done with empathy and creativity.
And a real belief in the potential of every single student.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Jim's teaching adventure, I'm curious, what stood out to you the most?
Ooh, good question. What about you?
So many things. But I think it's his unwavering dedication to those kids.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a big one.
He really saw something in them that others might have missed.
He did. And he never gave up on them, even when they were challenging.
Exactly. And he ends the memoir with this quote from Leonard Cohen.
Oh, yeah, I love that quote.
From the song Suzanne, he talks about this woman who leads you to the river, wearing rags and feathers from Salvation Army counters.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it?
It is, and I think it speaks to that resilience and resourcefulness.
And that unexpected beauty we find in those who are often seen as different.
Right, maybe even marginalized.
It's like a reminder that true learning, it often happens outside those traditional settings.
In those messy, unpredictable moments of life.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, it's a call to action for all of us.
To embrace our own unconventional paths.
To see the world through the eyes of those who experience it a little differently than we do.
Because after all, there's a little bit of Bradley, Brenda, and Jim in all of us, right?
I think so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.